Hi, PJ.
Hello. Got
Thank
my
you.
coffee.
Yeah,
If we're having a sex talk, we need coffee.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I try not to go as purple as my picture when I'm talking about it. Yeah, thank you for coming on. We've
Right.
spoken about this for a long time. I've known PJ, I think we worked it out to be about 18 years, didn't we? And you certainly didn't do this when I first met you.
No.
So could you tell us a little bit about what you are, what you do, and maybe how you got into it?
Yeah, absolutely. I, from a very young age, about 14, I knew I wanted to work in the field of relationships and sex education, which sounds a little bit weird. And what's slightly more odd was I was at a Catholic school at the time, and we had one remaining nun there. So you can imagine their horror when I declared what I wanted to do for a job. And I distinctly remember one parents' evening when the teacher opposite my parents and I looked really pale and anxious and leant across the table and said, "You do realise your daughter wants to be a sexual therapist?" And at which point they said, "Yeah, it's wonderful, isn't it?" So from a young age, I knew that I wanted to work in this field. And as I got older, things evolved. I had a real light bulb moment, and I actually wanted to work in the proactive sense rather than kind of therapy where perhaps it's already broken down. I felt really passionate about investing in young people. So qualified as a relationships and sex educator, and I now spend my time working with young people and young adults and parents, various schools, various organisations, and it's really just about having the opportunity and space to talk about this stuff without the awkwardness, because there's so much taboo and shame around it, and actually young people need to be informed and be empowered for when they make their decisions. So, but as well as an RSE educator, I'm also a mum. I've got three lovely human beings, all teenagers, about to exit their teenage years. But yeah, so I am a mum and I get it. And I know this is really big as a parent. So I really hope that today's session might leave some of your viewers feeling a bit more sort of empowered and confident.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, because I think, and I feel it as well, it's that kind of avoidance. And, especially when you say you've got more than one and your little one's coming up and you just see them as the baby. So then it's almost like you think, well, I'm not doing that yet because they're still babies.
Yes.
But that's
how can they be sexual beings? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So so where should we start?
Well, I wanted to just talk about the why. Why is it difficult? The what do we talk about? How do we talk about it? That kind of thing. So I think this is stuff that all parents struggle with, even if you've got a good relationship with your young people. It's still about ourselves and our baggage. I think a lot of this. I mean, first of all, the importance in talking about this is about removing the shame and the taboo, and actually it's safeguarding. The bottom line is the kids need to know what is healthy, what's acceptable, what's right. And so they actually recognize these qualities in healthy relationships, and they know they can identify red flags if they see them. And it's just about helping them learn that actually, you can choose whether you do become sexually active or not. And for someone who's asexual, that may not happen. And that's okay too. But it's about empowering people to know that if they do, they've got the tools to know how to have safe, healthy relationships. So I kind of think, when I've talked to parents before, it's like the question is, but what's stopping me? Why is it so difficult? And the reality is sex is a massive topic. It's just full of our values, our attitudes, our own experiences from parents, schooling, culture, religious beliefs, and all of these things can actually create a sense of it not baggage necessarily in a negative way, but just it's there. We've got this thing here, and so that really impacts us as parents, and we then have to talk to our children and pass on this information. So the ability to talk about sex really does relate to our own RSE. And what I love to do is I'll ask you, Claire, okay, if I said to you, describe your relationships and sex education in 3 words, which words would you use?
How I was kind of
you summarize your own RSE, whether that's school, parents, whatever. What 3 words would you use to describe it?
Okay, by nuns. I'm going to use 2 words, but small amounts, and see, I feel awkward already.
Don't worry, that's fine. I mean,
just not a lot, basically. I couldn't think of the words, but just not a lot, and by people that didn't know you know, by nuns, just people that didn't know.
Yeah. So you are not alone. So every time I do this exercise, whether it's teenagers or adults, generally speaking, it's negative words, which
right.
is huge actually, because it shows whatever we have, you know, whether we've had some experiences more significant than others, generally speaking, our previous experience of this sort of education has been fairly negative or non-existent. So this is where it starts. This is the challenge, you know, and then we have to become articulate and confident, and actually it's really hard. So what I want to do is describe, it's more like it's kind of like a slow cooker approach. Think of it as slow cooker, not microwave cooking, okay? So it can take time to build confidence talking about this subject, okay? But give yourself permission to take that time. And just remember, it's just a conversation. It's just another conversation. And the more relaxed you can be about that, as if you're talking about the weather or what you're going to do today, or, you know, who's cooking, whatever, your teens will recognize that kind of relaxed feeling in you, and that will gradually work, and they'll feel that from you. Whereas if you're awkward, they're going to pick that up straight away, which creates this kind of barrier. So the reality is, young people do want to talk about this stuff, whether we think it or not. And I've got some stats here from the Sex Education Forum. 70% of young people wish they had more information from their parents at the time they became sexually active.
That's interesting.
That's a huge statistic. So actually, although we think our children don't want to hear it from us, actually deep down, ultimately, we are that safer space to talk about it. Now, other data here, I've got 70% of 18 to 25-year-olds, so those who've left the teenage years, who've reflected back, and they felt that they wanted more information about the emotional side of relationships, how to deal with breakups, how to avoid hurt. What do you do if there is rejection? You know, all this stuff which you kind of expect people to know how to deal with, and yet we're never really taught. There's no toolkit you get given when you're born. So it is complicated, there's a lot there, but the reality is teenagers have questions and they wake up every day looking for answers. I hear this. And unfortunately, a lot of their education is now from porn or from their peers. So my question is, if we're not talking to our teens, then who is? I was going to read some of these questions if you're happy for me. These are genuine questions I've had, which shows kids just want to know stuff. So things like, how do you deal with gaslighting? What to do if you get an STI? What does a normal vulva look like? Do I need to act like a porn star to be appealing? Is foreplay important? Do you have to have sex? Can a person still have a relationship if they don't experience sexual desire? I mean, these are massive questions, and you can see they don't have the opportunity to ask and get, you know, informative, accurate information. It can pile up into such anxiety, and then potentially you're creating another generation of people who don't really want to talk about it because it's just too awkward, and then they're stuck when they have their children. So it kind of carries on and carries on. So yeah, it is really difficult. I think the reality is, I know that Relate, the organisation about relationships, they've said that 45% of under 25s use pornography as their main sex educator.
Right.
Nearly half of them, you know, and that's quite huge, because it's so distorted from reality. But if they don't have anything else to compare it to or learn about, that is going to be their education. So yeah, that's why it's really important. I've got some tips about when to talk and what to talk about and how to, if you're happy for me to just
go because I think when is please do, because when is quite a big question. I think that's
yes, it is. And I don't have all the answers, but I will say that actually you can't start early enough.
Right.
There are concepts like consent, where it doesn't have to be about a sexual consent, but the principle of consent, permission giving, permission seeking, can be taught from the minute they're able to speak, you know. So actually there's elements of consent and the use of correct terminology about body parts. All of that can happen really early on. And what you're doing there is laying a foundation of accurate information. Now, don't panic, because if you haven't done it years ago, and you've got teenagers now, it's never too late to start. But the importance is, if they have the terminology, for example, you know, this is an arm or a limb, and we have no problem talking about this. And yet, you know, you talk about body parts, you know, bits down there, and suddenly we have all these kind of pet names because we don't want to say the actual words, and that in itself can create this real sense of shame and taboo. So it's fine having pet names as a family if that's what you choose to do, but also make sure that your teams know the accurate names for each body part. Particularly if they need to speak to a medical professional, you know, they need to know the bits they're talking about. And again, that comes back to safeguarding. If something, you know, if something bad's happened or happening and they're uncomfortable, they need to be able to articulate what's going on and where it's happening. That's really important. Teaching mutual respect, mutual consent, that's a foundational thing. You can start as early as possible, because we want them to understand what respect is and what consent is in any form of relationship, whether that's romantic or not. So that's really important. And I think sex is a little bit like fire. It can be really warm and comforting, but also can be really dangerous and burny depending on the people involved. So it's about them having these tools and an understanding before they need the information. And that's the thing I think sometimes parents panic about, especially when you've got your youngest and they are your baby, and just like, oh no, I can't believe I'm having this. But actually think of it as empowering them and keeping them safe. You know, it's just so important. So the question, what do we talk to our teens about? Terrifying. I get it. But I'll ask one question, and this will hopefully start the process of thinking, okay, what do you want your teen to know about sex and relationships? Okay. So if you're a visual learner, draw a poster, do a spider diagram, and think of all the things like values, qualities, knowledge. Could be biological aspects, you know, body parts. It could be sexual health. It could be the emotional side, relational. It could be online safety, dating online. But think about what you want your teen to know, the things that make your teen safer as they enter into their adulthood. That sometimes helps as a bit of a kind of a distancing technique. So you're basically still providing that protection that you want for your child because you want the best for them. But you're brainstorming, you're putting it down on paper, and actually that can help you begin to mold the kind of things, the information you want to pass on. Another idea is to contact the PSHE lead at the school that your child attends and just ask them about the content and the different topics that are coming up, because that way you can just ask your child, instead of saying, how was your day? And they'll grunt at you or they'll go, yeah, fine. If you say to them, tell me what you learnt about blah, 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 because you already know from the PSHE lead what they've covered, that can start a conversation, even if it's just a few sentences. And by doing that, you're showing your child you are happy and willing to talk about this stuff. Also listen for clues. Like if you're driving your child and their friends somewhere and they're having a conversation, just hear about what they're thinking about, what they're aware of, you know, maybe what's worrying them, what they've seen, what they've heard. And all of this can give you this kind of content to begin to sort of just start chatting about. I know it feels overwhelming. It can feel like a massive responsibility, but just don't panic, okay? I've got a number of tips here that I've got listed, which there are so many, but I wanted to contain this information, so I've literally written them down to keep me focused. I could
we'll get you on again, PJ.
I could talk for days. So here's some top tips to help communicate with your teen about sex and relationships. So first of all, you do not need to be a sexpert. Okay, take the pressure right off you. You do not need to know everything. And actually, it's really empowering for them to see that you don't know everything. It gives you a great opportunity to research stuff together and learn together. Relationships and sex deserves, it's such a massive topic, and it just deserves more than the talk. You know, how many of us had the talk? And it was never enough. You know, it's ridiculous. There's far too much to try and fit into one talk. So change your thinking if that is what you're at. Just think about it as a scaffolding approach. You're building and building and building. You're increasing their knowledge bank. And this can happen, you know, you've got 18 years, basically, ultimately. So you've got a long time to invest in them and do it bit by bit. Talking about things little and often. So don't do the lecture. Don't do the sit down and having that talk. Just drop it in, and it's just the kind of very relaxed observations, comments. All the while you're doing this, you are showing them again that you're happy to talk about this subject and it's not taboo. Some parents say to me they're worried that if they talk about certain topics, that it's going to encourage their child to go and either look at it, find out more, or go and do it. Right. But education is not the same as condoning. So we wouldn't say to a child, go and build a boat without giving them an instruction manual, all the tools. Mm-hmm. So, but we know they'll see boats, you know, they're going to grow up and recognize that boats exist. So what we're doing is saying, actually, we are very, very much nowadays, we're living in a sexualized society. So in one form or another, they're going to come across terms, ideas, concepts. So what we're doing is actually gradually building up their knowledge bank. So when they do, they actually have something to base it on, rather than just going with the flow and go, oh, okay, so that must be normal then, because everyone's saying they're doing it, you know. So it is about having those conversations openly, but not worrying about, you're not condoning it. It's just about kind of empowering them to have that information. Set yourself boundaries. So a good sex educator will never talk about their sex life. So why should you as a parent? There's no pressure there. You've got to set boundaries. And actually, you know, questions deserve a response. They don't always deserve an answer. So allow yourself to not necessarily provide, you know, if they're wanting details. And you can say, oh, you know, that's a really great question. Leave it with me and I'll get back to you, but make sure you do. And it could be that you're responding to them and acknowledging that, but actually you've appreciated the fact that you've got boundaries, just like they've got boundaries. So they may not want to share things with you, and that's okay too. Assumptions. How often as a parent do we make assumptions? Don't make assumptions when it comes to this. I know it's really, really hard. I heard a lovely story about a little boy in primary school who in a lesson he stuck his hand up and he said, miss, how do you spell sex? And she was mortified. She thought, what on earth is he thinking about? And he said, I can spell in, but I can't spell the sex bit. And they were learning about mini beasts and he wanted to write insects. So, you know, that poor teacher for a minute was going, safeguarding, oh my gosh, what's going on? Actually, context is everything. So try not to react. Just try and listen and hear what your child's saying. So this is a little bit of homework for all the parents listening to this, okay? I can guarantee there are probably at least 1 or 2 words that we're not comfortable saying. So when you're on your own, think of all the words to do with sex and relationships and notice when you don't feel comfortable. So if there's certain words that you kind of grimace a bit and it's like, oh no, I don't want to say that out loud or whatever, just notice those words and keep practicing them, because those are the words that are uncomfortable for you, and that can vary depending on our own experiences. But by doing that and becoming more comfortable, you will then confidently talk about the subject and mention all these words without any awkwardness. And again, by doing that, you are saying to your team, this is an okay topic to talk about. You don't need to be shameful about this. It's not, you know, too awkward. It's just about removing that shame and that taboo, which, you know, can be a real hang up for years and years and years. The reality is our values really matter. So all families are going to have different values based on our, you know, upbringing or our religious beliefs or culture. But the key is to have a united strategy with your teenager, because by teenage years, they're beginning to become independent, beginning to have their thoughts, their ideas. Some days they know everything, we know nothing. But the reality is we have to kind of meet in the middle. So when it comes down to things like words for genitals, friends in the bedrooms, technology, sleepovers, rules for datings, all those kind of things, have a conversation together and come to an agreement, because by doing that, you're inviting them in and they are much more likely to kind of comply with that agreement and respect that mutual decision, rather than feel they've been told what they can and can't do. Again, that really aids open communication. Now, this one's quite hard, but be a good role model. I know we're all human and we're not perfect. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes I don't want an adult. I really don't want to be an adult. And actually you can think, no, my child needs me. So it's about being honest, being open, being patient and non-judgmental. You know, as parents, I think it's so easy to go, I've got the answer. You can do this, try that, la, 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 la. We try and fix it all. And actually, we just need to be listening to them. In that moment, we need to be hearing what they're bringing to us. They've chosen to share something with us. And if they come to us with the little things and we respond well with patience and honesty and, you know, not being judgmental, they will come to us with the big things. Those moments in their lives when they really need that safe parental input. Reversing communication techniques, that's another thing. You know, how many times do we talk at our child, at our teenager? If we try and reverse it and talk about stuff with them, that's a much better way of including them in that conversation and can improve the communication generally between you and your team. Seizing natural opportunities. This is fabulous. So a few years ago, Love Island entered our home, and they were of an age where I was not particularly keen for them to be watching that. And I knew if I said no, they'd go underground with it, and they'd be watching it on their friends' phones at school, and it would just happen. So I said, no, that's fine, but we'll watch it together. So we did. And it was amazing because we all watched it. And because we basically viewed the third party, i.e. the programme, and this can apply to films, adverts, other people's relationships, it could be anything, as long as you're distancing yourself. So we were watching the people on Love Island, and it opened up conversations about self-esteem, body image, you know, saying things like, how do you think that made him feel? Or why do you think she did that? And they were contributing with their thoughts and their ideas. And so what that did was enable us to have this open conversation about sex and relationship stuff. They were sharing their views. I, as a parent, were able to understand where they were coming from, which then helps me input to them. And suddenly this kind of open forum just happened, and it was really powerful. So I'd highly recommend using any opportunities you see around you, you know, on a daily basis, just to get their thoughts. Oh, what do you think about that? You know, get them to actually articulate it, because then you're not lecturing. You're not sitting them down and saying, we need to have a talk. It's a very natural way of communicating with them. Another tip, don't get eye contact. No teenager wants their parents sitting like this when you're going to talk about sex and relationships. So avoid contact. So, you know, watch TV and talk about that. Go for a dog walk. Talk when you're in the car, because you're side by side, not in front of each other. Really subtle differences, but makes a huge difference. And being busy, you know, doing something with your hands, if they're busy, you can both chat about stuff, but it takes that pressure off, that intensity for you as a parent as much as it does for them. So I found that really helpful. But ultimately, remember that although your teen may not appear to want to talk, even when they roll their eyes, that shows they're listening.
Yes. Yeah.
So everything you're saying, whether they acknowledge it or not openly, they are hearing it. And they'll take on board what they need to take on, and the rest of it will go. So, I mean, the other thing is to not give them too much information, because then you might lose the key message of what you're trying to contribute. But ultimately, teens need to be prepared before they need the information before they need it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's very much about before emotions get involved, and that makes decision making much harder. They need to have this kind of core understanding. Whatever you discuss, whatever the topic, just do it respectfully, be kind, be sensitive. And I often say, listen to understand, not to respond. Again, that's really hard sometimes as a parent. With quick fixes, we want to make sure they're okay and move on, but actually we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So we need to really listen to what they're saying, and try and understand where they're coming from. But ultimately, you know your teen the best. So push into the awkward, and you may just find you have some really rich conversations coming out of that. Loads. So I've got a few activity suggestions, which I thought if I just throw them out there,
yeah,
you can pick and choose.
Yeah.
I'll probably send them to you as well. So if you want to put them on your
Facebook,
oh yeah,
that would be amazing. Yeah, thank you.
Just to give you some practical ways of beginning this conversation, you know, apart from watching the TV or whatever it is we've talked about.
Yeah.
There's something called the Intimacy Pyramid, which I've got a link. It's a free card game, effectively, and you could leave them scattered on your table, dining room table or something. And all it is different qualities of healthy relationships. And it is basically an activity where your teen can choose what's important to them. So there's no right or wrong answer, but it begins to help them understand what they're looking for in their ideal relationship. And there's also the sex card. Throw that in later, and it kind of, again, for someone who's asexual, that won't appear, it won't feature, and that's fine. But if it is something that's going to be important, then it's about, where is that important? Where does it fit? Do I want all these foundational qualities in the relationship first? It's that kind of idea. Again, we don't often have the chance to sit there and go, what do I actually want? You know, so often teenagers get caught up with the current thing, and they just end up in this sort of relationship or scenario before they've even thought, is this what I really want? So it's a great activity for that. For the parents, talk with your peers over a bottle of wine or coffee and biscuits. Practice talking about sex and relationships with your peers. So it's kind of safe. but you can get much more confident with using words and talking about the concepts, finding out what you think. So you're kind of separating yourself from your history and your previous experience of RSE, and you're beginning to formulate how you feel, which will empower you then as a parent to talk more openly with your teenager. There's also Ask It Basket. So that's basically where you have a little basket in the house with post-it notes next to it. And at any point, your teens can put questions on those bits of paper in the basket. You can take them away and you can say, thank you so much for that. Really great questions. I'll get back to you. So that gives you the space to find out information if you don't know it. But it also means that they've been heard, but without the awkwardness of having the conversation. It's another way of them getting information from you if they're too frightened to actually say it out loud. So just a really nice little thing to have around, basically. And there are some others, but I will leave them for you to post on your group.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I know there's a lot of information there, but hopefully
yeah.
it's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I love the kind of, because we talk about that quite a lot in this sort of understanding about the deep listening, because, you know, we're so used to, you know, the teenagers asking, and we're already in our head formulating the answer before they've even finished. Yeah. And, you know, you're not going to answer properly from that place, are you?
No, and how many times do we have a conversation with anyone and we've already got that internal dialogue formulating because we know what we want to say back, and in that moment we stop listening effectively. Yeah. And I think for teens particularly, they need to be heard. Even if they don't agree with what they're saying, they need to be heard, and we need to try and understand them better as to why they think that. That's it. And even that kind of like, because we're obviously the star of our own movies, aren't we? That like, oh, I've got the answer to that. Oh, I know that. Or, oh, something happened to me like that. And we jump into that reaction. Yeah. And I think, you know, that where you spoke about baggage as well. I mean, I think that's such a big thing where we can only experience them through our own stuff, and we can only experience our conversations that we're going to have through our own stuff. And I think it's allowing them to know that, you know, even our beliefs are not real, are they? They're just our beliefs. And I think when they can kind of see that just because we've taught them something about the way we feel, it's not always true, because they will formulate their own kind of opinions on things. But I suppose we're kind of focusing on the basics rather than our actual beliefs. And that's why we need to teach them the tools, like the factual information, because all our relationships are going to look different. All their experiences and relationships will be different from our own. You know, we don't raise children to be mini us's. They are individual human beings, and all we can do is try and equip them the best we can. So it's about them really knowing, for example, what you know, what abusive traits are in a relationship. There was a girl at school. I got some anonymous feedback, but I know it was a particular group, and they were age 14. And because we've been talking about this sort of abusive behaviour, and we mentioned gaslighting, she'd realised at that point she'd been experiencing gaslighting, and she was currently in an abusive, toxic relationship, and she didn't know, she didn't recognise it, and she couldn't name it. So by giving the facts, it empowered her enough, and she'd written on this form, she said, I'm no longer going to let him treat me this way. So, you know, in that moment, you've got somebody who's making a life-changing change, which potentially prevented her from going down a very slippery slope of unhealthy relationship behaviour. So as much as we are different and we're all going to experience things differently, there are fundamental key bits of information which as parents we can pass on in order that they are safe. You know, they know what is going to keep them safe, and that they should recognise that they are happy. And consent means that you should be feeling happy in a relationship. You know, in the words of someone, should be building you up, not breaking you down. You need to love yourself enough to get out of that relationship if it isn't building you up, which is really hard. But it's kind of empowering them, you know, being their cheerleaders from the background, going, you know, and lifting them up enough so whatever they do then face, they've got these tools in their back pocket, and hopefully they'll be able to sort of recognise it before things go wrong. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, PJ. That's all right. So just to finish off, how do people find you? What do you do? I mean, you're obviously going to schools, but do you do kind of private work for people? Yeah. So because I became independent because I specifically for this reason, so I could be free to work with anyone or any organisation that wants to support their young people. So I work with state schools, private schools, youth groups, parents, one-to-ones. So if you don't like a big group setting, do one-to-one sessions. I I've worked with the YMCA. The police have just asked for some input for their officers in terms of when they're working with young people. And I've worked with domestic abuse survivors, so sort of seen the full circle for them. And they were saying, these are people in their 20s to 50s, and they were saying, we were never taught this. And that's kind of seeing the other end when it's already gone wrong. So for them, they're really excited. And we did all this healthy relationship stuff in the workshop, and they ended feeling so inspired and empowered. They want to now have a relationship again, which is such a massive shift from their, you know, often horrendous experiences historically. So all sorts of people who need input. I do bespoke stuff basically. So I'm hoping I can meet those needs wherever they are.
Yeah, I loved it.
I was going to say, it's Rephrase is the business itself. It's Rephrase, and the phrase bit stands for providing healthy relationships and sex education. And it's about rephrasing the conversation. So, you know, historically it was all about risks, reproduction and disease, but actually there's so much more to healthy relationships and sex education. Yeah. So the website is www.rephrasesw for southwest.co.uk.
Perfect. I loved it the other day when you said a group of mums had clubbed together and you went and spoke to their 16-year-old boys.
Yeah.
I mean, that's perfect. How amazing.
So proactive parents, wonderful. And the boys, although they were a bit nervous at the beginning, by the end, they'd all engaged fully and they really enjoyed it. And I just thought that is amazing. So I mean, if there's a need, I hope I'll be able to help. So if you need to get in touch, please do.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. You've been amazing. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, thank you.